Thank you, Andy. I'm very excited for this panel. I'd like to introduce our two panelists that Andy mentioned. Our first panelist is Andrew Crisp, who founded CarringtonCrisp in 2003. Since that time, the business has worked with nearly 200 universities and business schools in over 35 countries, doing a wide range of consulting, creative, and market research to help these institutions evolve and change. He is a well-asked speaker and been asked to speak at many industry events, as well as being quoted in the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Globe and Mail, and the Australian Financial Review. I'm very excited to have Andrew join us today. Our second panelist is a LinkedIn veteran of 10 years, Dan DeAndrea. He leads our online schools business within our larger education business that Andy mentioned I run. He has worked with our research firm Ipsos to survey working professionals and discover, hey, what are insights for those who don't have bachelor's degrees? And very excited for them to share research from both their areas. And with that, I turn it to Andrew.
Thanks very much, Rowan. Delighted to be partnering with LinkedIn. We've conducted quite a wide piece of research. What we're going to do today, though, is just share a few key highlights, really trying to focus on what's been happening in the market, where the opportunities are, and what that means for providers in this marketplace. So 3 quick bites, and then we'll get involved in the panel discussion. So first off, where is the market today, or where might it be in a few years' time? I think I should begin with the 3 least surprising words you're going to hear today. COVID accelerated change. What we're talking about is things that were already in the marketplace but have moved on rapidly, and the numbers are a really good way of looking at that. If you look at the chart, you'll see back in 2019, a company called HolonIQ did an estimate of the market size globally for online learning at about $45 billion US. Then just as we were getting into the COVID pandemic, they looked at it again, and the number then had almost doubled, $97 billion. And then just 6 months on, the mid-period of the pandemic, well, we hope it's the mid-period anyway, that market has grown 20% more to $117 billion US globally. So a vast acceleration in terms of how online learning is becoming very much part of the mainstream. So what is driving that change? Well, there's lots of things, of course, driving that change. You only have to go back, a little bit in history. 2017, 2018, McKinsey did a report. They reckoned 300 million employees worldwide were going to have to upskill or reskill to remain in employment. Now, where we are, we're in the pandemic, almost at the end of the pandemic, hopefully, and there's been a massive change in just the last 15 months. Digital has become mainstream. Digital is, every business is a digital business, and consequently that 300 million has probably doubled, if not more than that, in terms of people who will have to acquire new skills. And of course, how are they going to do that? Well, for many of them, they're not about to give up their jobs. They want to keep learning while they're working, and online is the way to do that. And we see particularly people looking to retrain, to reskill, and you can see the numbers here. Coursera, just in one quarter, added 5 million new learners last year to a total of, I think, 87 million. Look at the other side, though, not the learner side, look at the employer side. IBM, Shell, various other companies, but IBM and Shell both reckon they have saved $200 million by switching to online and e-learning. So when you've got employers pushing from one direction to saying, this is good for us, you've got individuals pushing from the other side saying, this is good for me to advance my career, there's no doubt, there's no question how the market is going to grow. So what does this mean for those who are providing learning in the marketplace? Well, 2 things I think are particularly important. First of all, brand awareness. Very simple message. Do your potential audience know you're out there? Are they aware of your name? Because the competition is intensifying enormously, both in the US, but globally as well, with new entrants to the market pretty much every month, it seems. Whether they are traditional universities going into the market, whether they are private providers going into the marketplace, whether they are technology-led suppliers backed by venture capital, vast numbers coming in. So brand awareness is absolutely key. And then secondly, given we see this big growth in the adult learning non-degree marketplace, do you have the skills to deliver there? Are you able to make those connections? Can you work with major employers to provide the opportunities for their staff to advance their careers? So these are the key messages. And with that, I'm going to pass over to Dan D'Andrea to talk a little bit more about the survey findings that he's had with Ipsos. Dan.
Thank you, Andrew, for the intro and for joining us to share your expertise. We'll chat again in a few minutes for some Q&A. Very excited to be here with all of you today and share another set of research we executed in partnership with research firm Ipsos, this one through the perspective of the student, specifically adult learners without a bachelor's degree. We wanted to learn more about their mindset entering the decision journey and what helped them make that decision. So first, some methodology. Ipsos fielded a survey, adults 25 to 55 in the US without a bachelor's degree. We were interested in the mindsets of these two separate subgroups. First, those who said they were interested in a program within the next 2 years. For this group, we wanted to know simply, what are you looking for in a bachelor's program? And then second, those who started a bachelor's program already, we wanted to know more about their decision process. So I'm going to share more about this full landscape and specifically call out some of the differences between how LinkedIn members responded versus non-members. So the first result that I'm excited to share is that LinkedIn members do have a much stronger interest in finishing a bachelor's degree compared to adults who do not have a LinkedIn profile. In the chart on the left, you'll see LinkedIn members were over 2 times more likely when compared to non-members to say they're extremely likely to start a bachelor's program within 2 years. The chart on the right, looking at respondents who already started a program, you can see LinkedIn members are 4 times more likely to have done so already within the last year, again, compared to non-members. So one early takeaway, if you're trying to reach adult learners who might be interested in earning a bachelor's degree, targeting people on LinkedIn with LinkedIn profiles greatly increases the chances you're talking to the right person who has aspirations and they are committed to continuing their education. Now we look deeper into the mindset entering the decision-making process. These graphs represent appeal of each feature, separated by LinkedIn members in blue, non-members in gray. The chart shares these features they're most attracted to, given feedback on these 5. National ranking, price sensitivity, then the next 3 were their most appealing: relevance for job opportunities, classes online, and flexibility to go at their own pace, with benchmark score of 0.33. So we wanted to help you all understand which ones are their priority and how potentially to position your messaging. So we can see they care most about flexibility, how continuing education is going to fit into their current work-life schedule, more so than national rankings or even cost. So 2 interesting callouts there. First, LinkedIn members are far less price sensitive than non-members. And second is how much more likely LinkedIn members are to prioritize having classes all online versus non-members. Again, to fit into what's likely an already busy day in life. So they, of course, want to be confident in the ROI for their investment of both time and money, as you can see with the job relevance graph in the middle. But working professionals simply require that flexibility to realize those educational and professional aspirations. Of course, this is the ideal audience for online schools, and those important sensibilities of that audience is heightened substantially when they're on LinkedIn. Last, let's look at adults in our sample who already started an online bachelor's program within the last year. So we wanted to know more about what their decision process looked like. We now know from Andrew's research, they're more inundated and overwhelmed with options than ever before. So we asked them how many programs they researched and actually considered before they chose their program. So in the chart, you can see about 2/3 of respondents considered only 1 or 2 programs throughout the entire journey. Furthermore, 72% of people who considered multiple programs ended up still choosing that first program they considered. So for this study, LinkedIn members look very similar to non-members, so we didn't split them out. But these findings highlight the importance of investing to consistently reach and influence the most relevant and the most active audiences. If your school isn't top of mind when an adult learner begins researching programs, you're not likely to be in their consideration set. And then it's too risky, too expensive to hope you can squeeze in there at the end. Their consideration set is just too small, again, likely 1 or 2 programs. And even if your school gets considered later in the decision process, it's really tough to beat out that first university they thought of. The data here from Ipsos suggests they actually chose that first program 80% of the time. So I'll summarize the Ipsos findings and then bring back Ramon and Andrew. First, interest in completing a bachelor's degree is much higher among adults with a LinkedIn profile versus non-members. Adult learners prioritize programs that fit their life more than any other feature. And then finally, having a continuous brand presence when they're forming their consideration set is crucial. All right, thank you all. Lots more data came from this survey, and I'd be happy to set up time with any of you individually to discuss. But for now, let's bring back Ramon and Andrew.
Really interesting research, Andrew and Dan. I have some questions. Dan, starting with you. You asked adults about their interest in starting a bachelor's program. Did you ask whether they were interested in other programs like associates or certificates in this research with Ipsos?
Yeah, so Ipsos did ask about those other programs as well, and they saw basically the same patterns, right? They had the same priority on flexibility, outweighing pricing, outweighing those national rankings. And then the same patterns with LinkedIn members versus non-members. LinkedIn members still much less price sensitive, and it still shows what we all likely assume. LinkedIn members just more career ambition, more likely to continue their education across all degree levels.
Great. And Andrew, Dan just mentioned that students interested in other types of offerings as well, such as associates and certificates. What did your research find regarding other types of program offerings?
Yeah, it's similar findings as Dan has just suggested. And particularly the thing that stands out for us is that as people get older, they're more likely to be interested in these shorter things, whether it's a certificate, perhaps even a digital badge or a micro-credential nowadays, whereas the younger group, perhaps those under 30 or perhaps under 35, will still think a degree is a good thing to have and they're going to get a return on their investment.
Very interesting. And so when you think about the landscape of the players, the various players who are playing in the space, how are they reacting? What do you think various players will pursue as their long-term strategy? Why don't we start with Dan?
Yeah, so I'll answer with what we're seeing and hearing anecdotally from traditional on-campus schools and some OPMs. So obviously traditionals, they lost a key advantage without their on-campus offering, but they're also losing the brand appeal that goes with that on-campus offering. So in the short term, they've pivoted with messaging that promotes flexibility with their newly formed online classes. A lot of conversations and strategies around reestablishing your brand, especially after struggles to fulfill marketing objectives, right, in the same manner they used to. Hearing a lot of branded search and organic going way down. But then on the flip side, it's been a really active year for OPMs, as again, we would likely all assume. So as traditionals face the choice of, should we invest in our own online capabilities where majority don't have the proper staffing or technology in place? Do we outsource to OPMs where obviously that's some profit sharing and you lose control? Or do we bide our time and wait for a previous normal and hope the market follows? But one other quick point, focus on the OPMs, obviously is master's level. So there is some good news. I just came across an article this morning actually from National Student Clearinghouse Research, and master's programs are actually up 6% year over year, while most other programs are flat or down. But the downside of their piece was how much masters are contributing to the student debt crisis disproportionately. So another big potential opportunity for online schools. Master's degrees are booming, but there's heightened concern over tuition, and as we've already established, that desire for more flexibility.
Great. Andrew?
Yeah, three key points, really. I think, first of all, those traditional universities that Dan spoke about, they're not going backwards. Yeah, they've had this online experience over the last 15 months. They've invested a lot of time and effort in it. Of course, they'll still want to maintain their traditional on-campus programs, but they're going to advance their online as well. And you only have to look at one market segment, the MBA, to understand this. Last year, GMAT data, MBA applications overall down 0.2%. Online MBA applications up over 80%. So there's a clear market there for those traditional providers who's got a brand reputation in that space. I think the second thing is that the OPMs that Dan talked about earlier, the Coursera's of this world, people like that, you only have to look at where they're making their money. It's the professional certificates. That's their big market opportunity. In fact, with the degree programs, they've announced that they're going to give back more of their revenue to the universities who they work with, presumably to incentivize them to try and grow that marketplace. And then the third component is international. We see programs, I think, at the Geese School in Illinois, they have their own online MBA. Originally, it was a very US-centric, but now they're getting international providers, international students wanting to take that program. And you see people like Baiju in India that nobody had heard of a few years ago. Now, 16.5 billion US dollars evaluation, doing deals with Disney to teach children maths and wanting to get into this adult learning market space. So it's fascinating.
Absolutely. It is incredible to see how the demand allows for these new players come in in a big way. One of the pieces of research from Ipsos, Dan, that you mentioned that stuck with me is this idea that the student analysis shows that 80% of the students selected the first school in their consideration set. I'd love to get both of your opinions as to the impact, importance of that for the marketers who are here joining us today.
Yeah, so there's been endless studies kind of proving this out, and you'll hear next from the expert in this regard, John Lombardo. Well, we all subconsciously build these consideration sets, right? Soda, it's Coke and Pepsi, sneakers, Nike, Reebok, no different for high consideration decisions or purchases. If you're car shopping, everyone on this call here will have 2 to 3 brands that come to mind. And odds are, next time you're in the market for a car, you'll wind up driving around town in one of those 2 or 3 brands. So when you begin your journey, back to to continuing education, when you begin the journey in the first place, there's likely going to be a school that will prompt and start that journey, right? Whether it be a paid ad or a friend or a coworker that's an alumni, and you start to associate that decision with that university. So from the student's perspective, and again, we're going to have a full session on this with Melody later, the research shows it doesn't matter how crowded the market is, you're still going to decide between 2 to 3 schools max. If I can keep mixing metaphors here, you aren't choosing between 30 car manufacturers if the market is suddenly flooded with more car buying options. So for online schools, as we've established, it's crucial to reach potential students before they form that consideration set, before they're in market, while simultaneously still converting those who are presently in market and ready to enroll.
Andrew, I'd love to get your thoughts as you think about how the marketers should interpret this data. Any different thoughts from what Dan said?
Well, I think Dan's absolutely right that the alumni are going to be pretty important in this marketplace in terms of if you're in work and you're thinking, I need to get some more learning, some more development, whether it's a degree or just an adult learning piece, the first person you probably speak to is the person who's sitting in, next to you at another desk, and say, I heard you did something, you went there, what was it like? What was the experience? And in the same way, maybe your employer has relationships with a group of institutions and you'll pick somebody up from that opportunity. I think the one thing we found as well is the initial contact is so important. So when you're looking at those 2 or 3 to begin with, as Dan suggested, the response you get back from the provider, the personal touch really makes an enormous difference in encouraging you to follow on with that student journey. And we've heard from students who consistently say, they made me feel important. And that was really significant in taking somebody in a certain direction.
So I would love for both of you to put on a hat as if you're the director of enrollment of a school. So the school of Andrew, the school of Dan, and you offered online programs. How would you react to these survey findings? Which piece would be surprising, and how would that change how you approach your work? Andrew, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think that the first thing I would say is, do we have the skills in our university to work with employers? Do we have those connections to have a really strong B2B offer? Are we good at engaging employers? Do we offer the things, not just the learning, but the piece around that? The thought leadership, the short skills courses that can develop people really quickly. Do we have the real skills in our organization to make that a possibility for us to deliver going forward? That's so important.
Dan.
Yeah, so you're going to have to excuse the LinkedIn confidence oozing out of this answer. But quickly reiterating our findings, it's never been more competitive. To get into a consideration set and getting there early is everything. So the strategy I would adopt is one that's proven to be super effective for many of our largest partners in EDU and other verticals on LinkedIn. So I would want to make sure I'm consistently reaching a combination of broad yet relevant audiences, and then number two, more niche focused, concentration specific audiences. But doing so in an environment where they're signaling the journey is about to begin, which would give my school a leg up and the best chance of being present when their consideration set is formed. If I'm only hitting them in search, for example, they are likely already in market. I want to make sure I'm hitting them before that consideration set is starting to be formed.
Makes sense. I'd like to pivot a bit. Though most schools have returned to in-person programs, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up COVID and think about how is that still impacting everyone's day-to-day activities. Starting with Dan, do you have a sense of how students are thinking about their choices given the factors of the current environment and COVID, et cetera?
Yeah, so some of the specific research from Ipsos showed that people who are enrolled in fully online programs were much less concerned than people enrolled in hybrid and then especially and obviously on-campus programs. So more specifically, only 1/4 of online students had any level of concern, while twice as many of the students in on-campus programs had major concerns about their choices given the current climate.
Andrew. Yeah, one of the things we find is that students who are thinking of where they're going to study are saying, if the worst happens, can I switch? Do you have the technology? Do you have the capability to allow me to suddenly switch to online as away from on campus? I want to be on campus, but I recognize maybe I have to change. I think just this week, Harvard announced a big outbreak of COVID and have to move a lot of their learning online. So if somebody like that has to do it, you want confidence that you be able to continue your studies and everything will move forward rather than a big hiatus and a sudden change of direction. I think I had a dean actually from a North African business school said it's a little bit like the tango. You're moving forward, but suddenly you can change direction. And you want confidence that when you do change direction, the music keeps playing.
I was still thinking about some of the slides that you presented. I think it was on your slide, Dan, with Ipsos. I was surprised to see cost and national ranking. I think we're at the bottom of the list of program features. Keep me honest here. If you were a program, I'd love to hear from both of you. How should you interpret that?
Yeah, so with national rankings, that one to me is a little less surprising. They do seem to have been incrementally losing favor over the years. We know there's a little bias built in, and mainly because it's based on who the student was before the education, right? So for example, their SAT scores or GPA, and less about what they became after the education. But cost is definitely more surprising. I wouldn't interpret it as it doesn't matter at all. Of course, it always does matter. But this wouldn't be a purchase where you're looking to save $1 at the expense of certainly the strength of the education. But again, for this specific group of adult learners we're talking about, and we saw this more and more extreme with LinkedIn members. How can you actually make this work while holding a full-time job? And which, I think the fact that they are holding full-time jobs makes them a little price sensitive. So I don't think pricing doesn't matter. I just think when they're looking at how this would fit into their work life, they're prioritizing other elements.
Andrew.
Absolutely. Convenience over cost every time. It's not that cost doesn't matter. Of course it does. And interestingly, as people get older, it becomes more important. You might expect the opposite. People earn a bigger income, but actually they have more outgoings. They have families, they have houses, whatever it might be. So cost actually becomes more significant. But every time we do a study, we've just done one for a school here in the UK, and you give people a range of costs, they never pick the lowest cost. They don't pick the highest, of course, but they want value, and they don't see value as being associated with cheap. What they see value as associated with is their career advancement.
There was an interesting question from those joining us and maybe we'll start with Dan, is what is it about the LinkedIn platform that seems to attract individuals that are at the precipice of making this choice to further their education? I'd love to know if you have a hypothesis or research or things you'd like to share on this.
Yes. So I do not want to steal Melody's thunder because we do have research and several hypotheses, but I'll kind of quickly summarize and tee her up. So basically, if you put yourself in their shoes, you are at a fork in the road of your career. Obviously, LinkedIn is one of the first platforms you're going to go to, but more specifically, you're going to go and you're going to look for the ideal job, right? You're going to look at the applicants of that job and see a lot of them have bachelor's degrees. A lot of them have a set of experiences that maybe you don't have. And that kind of kicks off your professional and your educational journey, right? And then over time, LinkedIn continues serving as kind of their hub for both that educational journey and the professional one. And they, again, I don't want to steal all of Melody's thunder, but they accrue more and more information through looking at schools' alumni pages and the school pages to understand what it's going to take for them to realize their professional aspirations.
Great. Andrew, any thoughts? Anything to add?
Well, it's slightly difficult for me to answer that one, but I would say one thing. We spoke to some students in the pipeline as part of the research we've done recently, and the thing that came across more than anything else to me was LinkedIn is where they find their boss. They find the people whose job they want next, and they can see what they've done, what they've studied, where they've studied, and it's a great way to research the marketplace. So, and these are people who have got the t-shirt. You can't get any better validation than somebody who's got the degree and got the job.
Well, thank you. And this takes us to time. So Andrew, Dan, very much appreciate your sharing your research. I definitely learned some new points as to how this environment has really accelerated the importance of getting into the mind early of the students who are considering this journey, which seems to be a lot of folks. So thank you again. And with that, I bring you back to Andy.